Sure.
Yeah, real quick before we start, I just need like for my class to get like a verbal consent that like I can share this with my professor and classmates. And
Yep, no problem. Anything that we say here, you're more than willing and able to share with your classmates in the academic setting.
sweet, thank you.
You got it.
So just sort of give me a general view of what made you interested in getting into sports analysis and betting and sort of how you got to where you're at.
Sure. So I was always in and around sports, played sports as a kid. I mean, hockey and soccer were my two main passions in terms of on field activity. Probably got exposed to sports betting at a way too early age through a variety of pools and friendly wagers, whether it was with family or friends, obviously in a very friendly capacity, more so than anything else. And, having spent time as an athlete trying to figure out and be fascinated by some of the quantitative modeling that came into play with sports betting, it was always one of those questions about how do you turn a hobby into a career and a profession. So my degree was in international economics, thought that I was going to work on Wall Street for all intents and purposes. And then kind of realized, towards the latter portion of my undergrad course of study that, I might want to do something a little bit different. And as luck may have it, there was a bouncer too, was able to get connected to the president of Caesar's Palace at the time, who's still there now. Turned in my resume, went out to Vegas for a battery of interviews and kind of forged my own path, learning the casino industry from table games analytics and, restaurant MPVs and all of that kind of stuff into trying to figure out how I could get into sports. And the sports media side, I'd be lying if I said when I first moved out here 15 years ago that I thought this was going to be the ultimate landing spot, but I count my lucky stars every day that it's worked out, at least to this point, how well it has.
Yeah. So sort of transitioning from working at Caesars going into the broadcasting side of things and being able to share your thoughts and your views with a large audience and a group of people. How did that transition sort of take place? Because I've always thought you're fantastic at it, and
Well, thanks for that. It was actually pretty interesting. So while I was working at Caesars, I kind of spent most of my time working in financial analysis, and gradually I was able to carve out a role where I was doing the sports betting side of things on the weekends, working as a supervisor in the sports book, and also working on the international player development side. And my mentor at the time actually left to take another job around town, thought that that's where I was going to be headed once he got his team established and built things up. And in the interim, Caesars kind of said, hey, look, we need someone that can go on radio and kind of do some of these potential interviews and marketing opportunities that are there. So it started real small and innocuous. I think I did a show in Springfield, Illinois that was actually on site and more or less as a testing ground for it. The company was happy with the results and how it was received. They put me through a little bit of media training, and it allowed me to kind of create an avenue that at that time wasn't really all that common, speaking about the numbers, how they were created, and trying to make gambling dialogue a little bit more mainstream. Look at some of the progression and how it's gone. A lot of those interviews started as kind of one-offs. And there's a number of markets that I've been in for 8 to 10 years, kind of talking about the industry. And things got to such a point where I wanted to see what else was out there outside of the walls of Caesars. Ended up leaving there to take on a small consulting job to kind of help devise a business to consumer product line. Ironically enough, it's a model that most of these sites have since replicated. We were just kind of ahead of our time and didn't have the funding to stick with it. So I kicked myself going, man, we were ahead of ESPN Insider from some of their gambling content. We were ahead of CBS Sportsline and a lot of those premium service that are out there that combine picks, analysis, video, audio, and full comprehensive content. But I guess it's always better to be ahead of the curve than behind it. The unfortunate part is you just always hope you can monetize it more effectively than some of the competition.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, now that you do, you have your podcast and you have the betting show on Fox Sports, how do you sort of manage between the two of those and manage your time and still, pick games and analyze betting as effectively as you do?
Very carefully, I guess, is the one way I would position it, and have a very understanding fiance who understands exactly what the time demands on my schedule are, especially during football season, where it becomes a 16, 18-hour workday trying to dive into every number that you possibly can for teams as prominent as the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs, and teams that most people could care less about, like the South Alabama Jaguars and of course, New Mexico State football, which is near and dear to everyone. So it's always a balancing act there. And time management probably is the single biggest thing that I have to look at my full week, break things up, and make sure I kind of adhere to a schedule. Otherwise, you go absolutely nuts, constantly chasing after your tail and realizing there just aren't enough hours in the day to get everything accomplished that you want.
Yeah. So, on the sort of content side of what you do, what do you think gives you, an edge? Obviously, you have a ton of experience. What advice would you give to people who are kind of new to this, who are picking games mostly based on, what they think that may be at more of an entry level, and how do they get better?
Yeah, I would tell people honestly have realistic expectations. I mean, you can't go into any activity, whether it's playing golf, whether it's betting sports, whether it's playing a sport or an academic discipline, and think just because you show up every day, you're going to be able to achieve ridiculous results. So it's putting time in. And it's that whole Malcolm Gladwell concept of 10,000 hours, which I think is a little bit of an understatement, probably closer to 100,000 hours if you really want to try and become adept at mastering any craft. And you have to learn how to handle the ups and downs, because one of the biggest challenges with sports betting in any capacity is the emotional swings. And if you allow your emotions to get the best of you, whether you're betting $10 a game or substantially more, it's going to take over your life. And I tell people all the time that you have to control your gambling rather than let your gambling control you.
Yeah. So that's, the way that gambling can, it can be addictive for people, obviously. You get
100%. And honestly, that's one of the biggest things that I think when you look at the proliferation of legalized sports betting, and of course I say that as I'm looking on my phone trying to place a bet as college football numbers are moving. So a live look in terms of what goes on in the life of a professional bettor. So I think it's so important to not be caught up in some of the social media hype, the glitz and the glamour, that 10-team parlay that pays $75,000. That's not what it's like on a day-to-day basis. It's trying to grind out small edges. It's betting 6 games, hoping that you're going to go 4-2, but you're going to have weeks where you go 2-4. And what do you do when you're facing the adversity and those bad beats at the end of games are working against you? It can be as frustrating an occupation as there is. So you have to be patient with yourself and try and maintain that level, even keel as effectively as you can.
Yeah. And, I think something that I've had to, check myself on, just, I've only been able to bet sports the last couple years. And one of the things that I've had to adapt to is removing my personal, what I want to happen from what I think is going to happen. How do you balance that? Because, sports are inherently emotional and something that where you want to root for people and you want to root for teams. How do you
You're 100%. And if I kind of wheel around in my seat, I mean, you'll see where my allegiances lie. And I can show you guys. I mean, I grew up a New York sports fan across the board. So over my left-hand shoulder, you see an autographed helmet from Lawrence Taylor and a bunch of New York insignias. But the reality of it is, if you want to be successful in sports betting, the same way in a lot of things in life, you have to remove your personal biases coming in and realize that it may be your favorite player, it may be your favorite team, but if you're serious about making money with it, then you have to look at it through an objective lens. And I think a lot of the same principles that we employ in sports betting are very similar to the financial markets. When you're investing in a company, you may be a huge fan, and this is an oversimplistic analogy, so I apologize if it sounds a bit pedantic. I mean, you may be a huge fan of Disney movies and you may love watching ESPN, but it doesn't mean investing in Disney stock is going to be the single best investment that you can make. So you kind of have to look at the numbers. You have to remove the names of companies. In this case, it's the names of teams and players, and make objective determinations in terms of who may be overvalued, who may be undervalued, and really begin to trust your numbers you're reading and all the processes involved.
Yeah. So sorry, on the broadcast, sort of side of your job, everything that you do with Fox, producing your podcast, how, challenging is that? And what are some things about that aspect of your job that you think a lot of people wouldn't know about?
I think one of the things about it, to be quite honest, isn't being really loquacious with everything you're saying. It's economy of words. So how do you take a difficult concept and kind of distill it down into, what may be a 30 or 45-second soundbite? And never having a media background myself, kind of coming into TV, radio, and those sort of things, those were the most challenging lessons for me, because anyone can talk for 6 to 8 minutes, but how can you take all of that information, consolidate it into a nice, easy, digestible soundbite, and allow people that may not have that level of familiarity with a particular topic understand it in the same capacity? And it reminds me, honestly, quite a bit of one of my professors in college. when it came to some of the more difficult economic principles that we would try and discuss, he would go, if you can explain something that people have written 300-page books on inside of 60 to 90 seconds to me, that's what's going to prove your depth and knowledge of understanding. Because if you're just regurgitating stats, or you're just regurgitating certain things you've read, having a photographic memory is great for those folks that do, but it doesn't always illustrate exactly how much you understand and how usable that information and actionable it is going forward.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I know that you sort of came into the, TV side of things later in your career. Like, for me coming up, I'm a broadcast major, and,
You're gonna have a lot more polish, hopefully, than I did. So you already have a leg up on the competition.
Possibly, yeah. The people who, I've seen on TV, like just a few names, yourself, Colin Cowherd, and Clay Travis are three guys over the last few years. I mean, I watch and listen to your guys' stuff all the time. And is there anyone who was like that for you when you were getting into the industry, who you sort of looked up to or wanted to replicate?
It's interesting because sports gambling really didn't have a place. So I would watch a lot of Sports Center, as I think a lot of people did that were my age and around. And so you watch the Chris Bermans of the world and the Dan Patricks and see how much fun those guys had on a day-to-day basis and the kind of energy that they brought on a regular basis. Another name, a guy who's not all that prominent now, Roy Firestone, who did a tremendous job with some of the interviews that were out there. I grew up a hockey fan, so I listened to quite a bit of Tom Mees and Gary Thorne. And while those guys were probably bigger on the play-by-play side, when you looked at some of the household names from a Sports Center anchor standpoint, I think those were kind of the more interesting characters, because you saw them understanding the sports, but also realize, hey, look, sports and broadcasting in general is supposed to be fun. So if you start to take yourself too seriously, you're not going to enjoy what you do on a day-to-day basis. And for those folks that used to watch Fox Bet Live or happen to listen to the podcast or anything else, the reality of it is, when you're covering as many teams as we do, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw up a player's name. You're going to mispronounce it. But if you can laugh at yourself in those instances and use that to make yourself that much better, I think it goes a long, long way. Because if you're constantly going to beat yourself up every time you screw it up, or you're going to fall victim to some of the vitriol that you'll encounter on social media, because we know everybody's an expert these days on Twitter, Instagram, and everything else. It's not going to create a healthy relationship between you and your profession. So I think that would be my best word of advice for those folks who are looking to try and do broadcasting. Embrace your imperfections, embrace your shortcomings, have fun with it, be able to laugh at yourself. And I think it's going to go a long way to kind of show your true character.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up, the experts on, Instagram and Twitter who, those type of people. And, the more of those come, the bigger of a following, you're able to accumulate. And has that ever affected anything in your job or the way that you do things ever since, you've accrued like a much bigger following? Is there pressure that comes with that? And
I think pressure is always a privilege. I know it's a cliche, but I think with pressure, it means that, hey, look, people are listening to what you have to say. People are responsive to some of your comments and feedback, and you can't operate in a vacuum anymore. So as we've seen with some of the social media, it's not necessarily indicative of real life in a day-to-day, but you do have to be cognizant as you gain a bigger platform in terms of how your words are going to be misinterpreted, or some of the things that you say very realistically could be taken out of context. And you encounter folks that are looking to try and chop you down. And I think it's the first illustration that you've made it and you've given yourself a bigger platform when you have people that are constantly trying to hate on everything you're doing. But if you believe in your craft and you surround yourself with like-minded individuals and have that support system, it'll pay dividends. But I think the perfect illustration, and I think it, will make a lot of sense to those folks that are big time Gonzaga basketball fans. I got myself into a situation this past March during the NCAA tournament where I came on, we were breaking down an Arkansas and Texas Tech college basketball game. And I talked about why I thought Texas Tech had an advantage. And a lot of it started with the head coaching edge that they had with Chris Beard matched up against Coach Eric Musselman. So I said that Chris Beard was probably licking his chops with the opportunity to go up against someone that I didn't think had the same X's and O's acumen. Well, that particular clip happened to go viral throughout the entire Arkansas fan base. Coach Musselman got involved, his wife as well. And I, had never thought that much about it. Didn't come with any ill intent or anything along those lines, but you encounter people that say, if you ever show your face in Fayetteville, we're going to pound your brains in, come down here and say it to your face. So it's one of those things that you always have to go, okay, take a step back. It's still sports, but at the same time, like we just talked about, people are passionate about their teams. And one of the things that makes college athletics as great as they are is that people want to live and die with those players on their rosters and those coaches. So I think you just have to kind of realize, all right, people get emotional about this kind of thing. Don't lower yourself necessarily to that level. Have some fun with it and really embrace, some of that interaction that I'm afforded given a relatively large platform at this point.
Yeah. And would you say, at large, at least, that those type of interactions like you had with Arkansas would be, I would imagine, less common than the, more positive interactions that you would have?
Definitely. But I think every time you have those, ironic as it sounds, those are what kind of captures the attention of people, and people begin to realize what your platforms are. Had a similar incident probably a couple of years ago on my platform. I didn't have nearly as much of an audience, where I talked about Texas A&M football being the most overrated team in all of college. I think they had started the season 6-0. Well, that soundbite was taken. They turned it into a poster that Kevin Sumlin put in the team locker room, and then Texas A&M proceeded to lose 5 out of their next 6 games. So the Texas A&M fans didn't quite have 2 legs to stand on. And I think that's one of the things that's so different about what we do from a sports betting standpoint. A lot of what goes on is black and white. I mean, I can have all the hot takes I want, but if things don't materialize on the field the way I envision them, not only am I called an idiot through social media, but my bankroll shows that I'm not seeing things the way I need to. I'm not into hot takes. I'm not into creating headlines or opinions or anything along those lines. I'm going to share my thought process as it pertains to sports betting. And however unpopular that may be, if I happen to say your favorite team sucks, guess what? I'm willing to bear that cross and take that weight on my shoulders to try and make sure that I stay true to what I'm doing in the numbers that I essentially, live by day to day.
Yeah, I'm going to go off script from my questions just for a second. Colts +2 at home against the Seahawks. I'm a huge Colts fan. How are we feeling about it?
You know what? If you told me that Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson were going to be out there at full speed, I would say the Colts were more than worthy of a bet as a home underdog. But I'm a little bit worried about the inconsistency they've shown during the preseason, the fact that you haven't had a full camp with some new pieces that need to get integrated. And while I don't hold the Seahawks defense in the highest regard, I do think that having Russell Wilson under center is a little bit tough to ignore against the Colts defense. It's going to play a lot of zone coverage behind there. I think Russ could have some success. And if your Colts are able to match, we could be talking about one of the higher scoring games of the weekend. So I think it'll be a fun watch. But from a wagering perspective, my only lean would be to the over right now. I'm not going to make a case for or against either side in that game.
That's completely fair analysis, and I think corner is the one position we kind of ignored this offseason that needed upgrading. I do like the pass rush coming into this year with the addition of Quiddy, and Touré's kind of an underrated name coming back.
Yeah, it'll definitely help. I think Touré coming back is a name that casual fans don't know much about, but we saw his impact when he was on the field. Let's see what that learning curve looks like for Quiddy. If he's out there, kind of in an every down situation, or Coach Eberflus is going to try and incorporate him more in known passing situations. So you never know exactly, even guys hailing from big time programs like him, the kind of impact that they can try and make. But I know Colts fans are already having visions of him being the next Dwight Freeney, donning the blue and white every Sunday.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. So how did the pandemic, the last couple of years, how did that sort of affect your work, and has anything good come from it, something new? Because the fact that we're able to have this interview right now is just something, despite all the negatives of COVID and how that affected school and colleges and stuff, it couple good things. Did it change your job at all, or did anything?
You know what? For me, it didn't change my job a ton. The podcast we've always recorded, my podcast co-host is based 2,000 miles east of me in South Florida. So we've never really done things face to face. As far as the TV show on Fox, I always did things remotely from a third-party studio, and a lot of the work I do for CBS HQ, I'm sitting in the exact same office. So on a day-to-day, it didn't change a ton. Obviously, you not knowing what sports were going to come back when the entire world shut down in the middle of March, there was a high level of uncertainty, and sports weren't immune to that particular shutdown any more than the hospitality industry or anything else that people did for a living. So that probably created the biggest portion of uncertainty. And then for me, the biggest thing was, all right, how fast are players and athletes going to get back on the field? Because if we have betting lines, even if there aren't fans in the stands, we can go about being able to do what we need to do on a day to day. But from an actual betting standpoint, the biggest challenge was trying to figure out, what it was going to be and the impact of no fans in the stands. Home field advantage is such a big part of everything that goes on. And league by league, there was nothing consistent about it. The NFL saw the lowest impact of home teams there. You saw a lot of European soccer teams actually flourish on the road. And now it's adjusting to what it's going to be like, especially for college football, when these kids that haven't been in those environments are suddenly playing in front of 100,000 fans, screaming for them when things go well, or in the case of a number of programs, booing you when things don't go so well in front of those home faithful.
Yeah. So how, in total, were you able to adapt to that?
Yeah, we did. I think we did a good job. And, one of the things for me is I surround myself with extremely smart people, guys that are a lot smarter when it comes to crunching numbers than I'll ever hope to be. But as much in this industry as anything else, if you can surround yourself with people that force you to think outside the box, are going to make you smarter, that's what you want to do. And I think, as you look at broadcasting that's out there, if folks aren't going to take the time to teach, other people, their thought process behind it, it does all of us a disservice. So we had guys crunching numbers, running all sorts of simulations, trying to figure out exactly what those impacts were going to be. And I would be lying if I said, if I tried to recreate any of that in Excel, I probably would have gone absolutely bonkers trying to do that level of computer programming. So thankfully, we didn't really miss a beat. Early on, the NFL was a little bit choppier than we would have liked, but right now, as we sit ever so close to the eve of yet another football season, I think things are going to begin to return to normal. And if they don't, hopefully we can get a little bit of an edge against the bookmakers and make a few extra dollars before they catch on.
Definitely. Going into the NFL season, any sleepers either to win the Super Bowl or make the playoffs, anything that stands out team wise?
Two teams I think that are being discounted a little bit. I'm not going to say sleepers to win the Super Bowl by any stretch, but when I look at their prices, underdogs to make the playoffs, both in the AFC, I think Denver is a team that's got a significantly higher ceiling than people believe. Teddy Bridgewater doesn't bring the same level of high-end talent as Drew Lock, but he's a little bit more of a veteran calming influence. And I think when you look at their skill position talents, the offensive line, it's underrated. Defensively, Vic Fangio's gone out there and really loaded up on defensive backs, which is one of the most important positions in the current iteration of the NFL. So I think Denver is definitely a sleeper there. And, while everyone wants to talk about Buffalo and New England in the AFC East, I'm maybe irrationally so a little bit of a bigger believer in Tua and what Brian Flores is building. I think you're going to get a healthier Tua. I think the weapons there with the addition of Will Fuller and Jalen Waddle through the draft, along with Devontae Parker and such, completely fly under the radar. And defensively, hey, I mean, if this team can generate a little bit of a pass rush, Miami can be one of those teams that kind of comes out of nowhere that people were high on last year, have discounted this season to surprise. The NFC, honestly, I mean, it's as wide open as ever before behind, the Tampa Bay Bucks. And I would have loved to say if we did this 3 or 4 weeks ago that I was bullish on the Minnesota Vikings, but I don't like all the buzz coming out of camp. And exactly the mixed messaging going on from the front office to the players to the coaching staff. So I've soured a little bit on the Vikings, but I'm still rooting for them to win 9 games because it'll do a heck of a job for my bankroll going forward if they can exceed their win total.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to get your thoughts on my big upset for the year. I only preseason bet I've placed was the Panthers to make the playoffs. And I know it seems like a stretch, but I'm looking at it, and they have quality young talent at each level of the defense. I love Joe Brady, kind of an LSU football fan, and I've seen firsthand what he's able to do. And I think this is Sam Darnold's first real chance.
Brady's an absolute wizard. There's no doubt about it. What he was able to accomplish in Baton Rouge with Joe Burrow and turn them into an absolute juggernaut en route to the national championship can't be discounted. I didn't love the comments from Teddy Bridgewater leaving Carolina saying we didn't work on game situations, specifically 2-minute drill and such. So whether that was true or, Joe Brady was learning and adapting to what it meant to be an offensive coordinator to the NFL, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Matt Rule, every stop along the way, he's been a program builder. You look at how he performed in season 1 at Temple and Baylor, essentially rock bottom. You start to install your culture, and by year 3, he's got them headed in the right direction. You mentioned this team offensively. Let's see what we get from Sam Darnold. I'm very curious. I worry a little bit about his accuracy. It wasn't something that he was great with when he was at SC, but I think DJ Moore is probably one of the best receivers that most casual fans know nothing about. We know Christian McCaffrey's as dynamic a weapon out of the backfield as you're going to find. Defensively, you said it. I mean, this is a group that's extremely young that I think is going to have some boom or bust moments. But when you look at a guy, like Brian Burns, who I think can be a dark horse to lead the league in sacks, or a defensive backfield with a Jeremy Chin in his second season, or J.C. Horner they drafted out of South Carolina. If they're able to get some of that veteran leadership, I mean, this is a team that has a high ceiling. I'm just not sure if it comes this year or next. But in my opinion, if you make that bet this year and next, Carolina will definitely find themselves back in the postseason, because especially in that division, I think there's more uncertainty after Tampa than maybe any other division in the NFC this going into the season.
Yeah, definitely. Well, are there any, last tips before we wrap it up? If, whether it be about sports betting or broadcasting or anything, trying to find success in the field that you've done so much in.
I think sports betting, it's just being patient and being willing to put the time in and setting realistic expectations for yourself. It's the same thing if you're going to try and play golf. Nobody goes out there the first time and shoots a 68 at Augusta National. So you have to be willing to put the time in, hone your craft, and realize, for every success you're going to experience along the way, you're going to have those rough patches, and try not to be discouraged. And I think that translates and probably provides a logical segue to the professional world. I mean, you guys know as well as anybody, when it comes to broadcasting, we all aspire to be calling the Super Bowl or on Sunday night or Monday Night Football, but you have to put your time in along the way. And I think the best piece of professional advice I was given early on, and I know it's not the cool in vogue thing to say, is don't learn the word no. Take advantage of every opportunity that's there. Do everything you can to kind of network with people that you think are like-minded individuals. And no matter how many doors you knock on and may be told to, be ignored or, not receive the response you want. Like I tell people all the time, the worst thing somebody can say in a professional capacity is no. And if that's going to discourage you from chasing after your passion, then you're not destined to be in a particular field. So continue to bang down those doors, being willing to work the jobs, the hours, and everything else that others don't want to do to put the time in. And good things come, because I really do believe, especially in this profession, the harder you work, the luckier you end up getting.
Definitely. Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. That was, super helpful, and I learned a lot. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate it. But one last thing, though, I do have to flip the script on you. Are you guys ever going to be able to bring a national championship up to Spokane? Are we going to be talking about the little engine that could when it comes to Gonzaga basketball, as long as Mark Few is the head coach up there at the Kennel?
Well, I think that Jalen Suggs signing with us was a huge deal, and I think that's going to get the ball rolling, because we've seen Few, for the past, several years, the last, 20 years, he's proven he can build a team up and take advantage of, making a good team out of a decent amount of talent. But now he's getting a great amount of talent, and the expectation is going to become that we win national championships. But I think that Jalen really is the guy who's going to get the ball rolling, because we've had draft picks, but we never really had a recruit that was that high. And then immediately the next year we get the number 1 overall player in the country. And I think we're building something special out here. And I do think that this could be the year with Chet and obviously Drew Timme coming back. Yayi, Kispert, and Suggs are obviously huge losses, but Nemhard comes back. We got the number 1 player in the country in Chet. Timme, I think, is the preseason All-American. And, Dominic Harris is kind of an underrated name, was a freshman last year. I'm looking for big things from him, and Hunter Salas. And I think we're deep. I think it could be.
Hey, fingers crossed. And I won't allow my bitterness about having Gonzaga at 9-1 to win the national title last year impact any of my assessments going forward. So I wish you guys nothing but the best of luck. I know it's a very passionate fan base out there that has long been deserving, not just of a Final Four berth, as we've seen, multiple times the last handful of years, but finally getting to the top of the mountain as a national champ.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully this is the year. Well, sweet. Thank you, Todd.
You got it, man. I appreciate the opportunity. If you have any other questions that come up, by all means, don't hesitate to reach out. And like I said, don't be discouraged in terms of email response times or anything else. And if there's other folks that you feel you've learned a lot from in the industry, continue to beat down those doors, send email, send direct messages, and do all of those things, because that's the only way you'll know and try and build some of those relationships.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
You got it. Good luck with the rest of your project.
Thank you.